Into Avernus is an interesting campaign because it asks the important question, what would it be like to play Dungeons & Dragons in hell? Because your typical adventure from Wizards of the Coast doesn't have you going to places like hell. It typically has you going up and down the Sword Coast to many of their different places in the Forgotten Realms. So what would it be like if you took the typical adventure and you dove down to the deep, deep depths of hell and fought devils and demons for a time? Well, strap yourselves in, kids, because this is not your daddy's regular old adventure. No, no, no. There's a new kid on the block. And he's on fire. But before we talk about the meat of this adventure, we need to talk about this. Because the very first thing I'd recommend when running this adventure is you look at the section labeled Baldurs Gate, and you ignore it. Because most WotC pre-written adventures have what are called tutorial sections, which usually go from levels 1 to 3, levels 1 to 5 in this instance, that are meant to just get the ball rolling for your characters and your players, and then go into the larger narrative as a whole later. But there is only a very small amount of pre-written adventures that actually have a good tutorial section at the beginning, and this is not one of them. Because not only does the adventure not really have a large tie-in to the large narrative as a whole, it's also incredibly difficult. Narratively, doesn't make sense and has very loose ties. Encounter-wise is incredibly difficult with one of the hardest level 2 dungeons I've ever looked at. 3, it takes a lot longer than most beginning narratives because it goes from levels 1 to 5 instead of 1 to 3, and the campaign itself only goes to level 12 or 13 at most, and you're spending the first 5 levels not even in hell. There is one positive I will say about the Baldurs Gate section, and that's it's very well written. If you want to run anything in Baldurs Gate, you have a ton of information about Baldurs Gate in this book. This section in the middle, that's the actual adventure in Avernus. All of this at the front and the back has to do with Baldurs Gate. That's a lot. But Wingless, if I'm supposed to skip the first 5 levels in Baldurs Gate, how am I supposed to get my party into Avernus? Which is an excellent question, and it's actually quite easy. You see, the reason your party is supposed to go to Avernus normally is because there's a city known as Torell that has recently been dragged down to Avernus. And eventually your party will discover that they have the ability to go down to Avernus and possibly rescue Torell and bring it back up to the regular mortal plane. However, normally through the book, you do all of this in the city of Baldurs Gate, which is not in hell. So what's the easiest way to get your players into hell without having to do the whole Baldurs Gate section? Put them in Torell when it sinks into hell. Have your party start out in Torell already, and already have them at level 5. And maybe they're visiting Torell, or they live in Torell, or put whatever reasons you want. And then while they're in the city itself, it sinks into hell, and then you can start the adventure with them already in hell and have a very good desire to get out of hell because they were in the city as it sunk, instead of hearing about it while they're in Baldur's Gate, and then while they're hearing about this city that sunk into the city, and then while they hear about a city that sunk into hell, instead of going into a cult narrative and doing all that bullshit, they could already be in hell with the city. That's what I recommend, but you do you. However, now that we are in Avernus, what's it like to play in Avernus?
But first, a bit of a history lesson. You see, in Avernus there is this wonderful eternal event known as the Blood War, a never-ending fight between the forces of devils and demons. Devils come from hell, where you are currently in one of its many layers. Demons, however, come from another place known as the Abyss, with a seemingly infinite number of layers. Hell is very structured, with many lieutenants and soldiers and rankings and generals and the likes. Whereas the Abyss and its plethora of demons are not. They are very unstructured and uncategorized and just an eternal hellscape of awfulness. Now, the current ruler of Avernus is a lovely lady known as Zariel. Now, Zariel is a rather new ruler of Avernus, and there are many other devils that are vying for her position. Devils you will most certainly encounter on your tales in Avernus. So for the entirety of your campaign, it's very important to acknowledge that demons come from the Abyss, and devils come from hell, which is where you are currently. And the Blood War does not take breaks. It is never ending and always happening. If you wish to learn more on your own time, I recommend Billy Talent's second scripture, first verse, Devil in a Midnight Mass.
So what happens now? Well, regardless of how you got your adventures into El Torell, you're still going to be starting with the city that got dragged into hell, El Torell. And you'll notice pretty quickly that El Torell is not doing too well. Aside from the obvious fact that it's, in hell, it's also being assaulted by all kinds of devils on all fronts and killing everybody they come across. The giant glowing orb of light above the city is now turned into an inky black darkness and is constantly throwing out lightning and meteors. The city itself has also been split in two, and there's only 2 bridges that connecting the 2 sides. Oh, and lastly, and most important, it's also being chained to the river Styx, and those chains are pulling it closer and closer to the river every couple seconds. So if the citizens don't die from the meteors or the random devils or demon portals opening up or the lightning strikes or just hell itself, eventually the whole city will just be pulled into the river Styx and they'll all die that way. So immediately you have to save as many people as you can, defeat a couple of devils and demons, and get everybody garnered up into a citadel and keep them all safe and protected. Oh, and don't forget, you also have a floating little Hollyphant with you named Lulu who doesn't remember anything, but she's very important to the adventure, so keep your eyes on her. And eventually, once you've done all that you need to do in El Torell and you feel like you're safe to continue, you now need to leave the safety of the city and go into Avernus at wide scale and find a solution to your problem. And while you're doing this, Lulu will slowly begin to remember some things from her past, some of them accurate, some of them not, but one of these memories will have you going down either the path of demons or the path of devils. But regardless which path you pick, I'm going to tell you this for free. Oh, fucking Christ. Both paths suck. Okay, so I have to tell you what a fetch quest is first. In video games, when you need to get something done, you typically need the help of another person within that game. So let's say your character is trying to help somebody retrieve their stolen goods from a cave of bandits. And you're told that a person within the nearby town has dealt with these bandits before, so you should go ask them for some help. So you go to that person and you tell them, hey, I'm dealing with these bandits. I've been told you've dealt with them before. Can you help me? And that character says, absolutely, I can help you. However, I can't help you until I get a fresh piece of pie from my favorite bakery. And I haven't had one today. Can you please go get me some pie from this bakery? Thus begins the fetch quest, where you need to go fetch something for this person in order for them to help you with your quest. However, there are certain times where this becomes extremely tedious and unnecessary and annoying. For example, when you go to that bakery and you say, hey, I need to get some pie. Do you have any available? And they say, ah, yes, that is our most favorited pie. However, we don't have the ingredients for that. We've actually ran out. The farmer said that they would be bringing it today, but they haven't. Can you actually go ask that farmer where our ingredients are? So you then go to that farmer and you say, hey, I need the ingredients for this pie that you're supposed to deliver. And the farmer says, ah, yes, I typically do deliver those. However, my farm was recently ransacked by a bunch of foul beasts and creatures. Can you go defeat those foul beasts and creatures for me, and then I can deliver the goods? So you go try to find these foul beasts and creatures, and you find someone who does know where they are, but they won't tell you where they are until you go pick up their daughter from school. Do you see where this is going? So by the time you reach the very end of all these stupid, unnecessary quest points, you then have to track all the way back through every single one of them to finally bring that person at the very start that fresh piece of pie to help you with that initial quest. So why do I tell you about this? Because the path of demons and the path of devils in Descent to Avernus are both structured in this way. And it is so tedious and annoying, and the worst part is it's the bulk of the adventure. Several months ago, I made a video where I ranked every D&D book I ever read. You can check it out here. And at the time, I ranked Descent to Avernus at A tier, but I hadn't got to the Path of Demons or Path of Devils yet. I'd read through both of them and figured, yeah, this might be a little bit annoying, but it should be fine. It was not fine, because it doesn't matter which path you pick. It doesn't matter which one you go through. They're both structured in this really annoying, continuous quest way where you have to go to one place to ask for help for them to just send you to another place to ask for help over and over and over again. And then once you finally get to the end of that, you have to backtrack through all of them to the very beginning, and it's so annoying. And I missed this at the beginning, but I'll tell you now, the reason you're going through all this is because you're looking for the Sword of Zariel, the ruler of Avernus' lost sword, which supposedly has the power to cut the chains off of El Torell and bring it back up to the regular mortal plane. And Lulu believes that either the Path of Devils or the Path of Demons will lead you to the Sword of Zariel. And eventually, yes, both do, but it's so tedious. So I really, really recommend reading through the Path of Devils, reading through the Path of Demons, picking your favorite ones and throwing out the rest and making your own path. Your players will thank you, and I will thank you. So once you've finally done all these fetch quests and you've found the Bleeding Citadel, which houses the Sword of Zariel, now what happens? So meanwhile, while you're doing all those fetch quests, regardless which path you do, you are also doing what's probably the most fun part of the adventure, which is driving around in your Mad Max-like vehicles that you get pretty early on in the adventure. And there's some pretty cool things with these warring clans who are all trying to get like a large army to run hell as well, but it all takes place with these Mad Max vehicles across the desert sands of Avernus. And these vehicles are pretty fucking sick. You have like quite literally dirt bikes with weapons, and then you can get basically these massive trucks with just wrecking balls and spinning chains and harpoons and all kinds of crazy shit. And on top of that, you can also get currency called soul coins and later upgrade your vehicles down the road for better gear. And it's really cool and it's really awesome and it's probably the best part of the adventure. But the unfortunate thing is that it's utilized so little. I would definitely have leaned way more into that if I was to run that adventure again. So I highly recommend you do as well, because it was by far the most fun for me and also the most fun, I think, for my players. But on top of that, while you're going around doing all this stuff as well, Lulu is going to be regaining some of her memories about her time in Avernus and her time spent with Zariel. And some of these memories you are going to get sucked into and play out yourself instead of just being told them. You get one interesting one at the start, and then you get one really scary one at the end. And it's only after you do all these fetch quests and you do Lulu's memories that you can then get to the Bleeding Citadel and get Zariel's sword back. And at this point, the adventure becomes really interesting because now you have a lot of different options for how you want to end the adventure. Because when you take the sword of Zariel, you then have the choice, or any of your players, to become an angelic creature yourself by taking the sword of Zariel, because it instantly transforms you into a pseudo-angel-like being. But you also have the capability of going straight to Zariel and giving her her sword back and transforming her into an angel, which is what she was before she came to hell. And then she helps you get the city free and she's completely redeemed. And that's one of the endings that you can go for, and it's the ending my players ended up with. But you can also just go and fight Zariel and defeat her and overthrow her, and then your players themselves can become the new rulers of hell, and then the campaign ends there. Or they can put one of the other devils in Avernus on the throne and work out a deal in that way. And I would say that's a pretty interesting way to end the campaign, with just the amount of options the book gives you on how to end it. You can end it with a bang, with a massive fight, with yourselves becoming the rulers of hell, or you can redeem Zariel so she becomes an angel once again, and it's pretty great how many different ways you can go about it. It just sucks that the majority of the adventure are those fetch quests that you have to go through. And I really wish a lot more of it was the driving around with the war machines and all those types of quests instead of the constant fetching over and over and over again. Going back to that video I mentioned where I rated all of the D&D books that I had read, I would now put Descent into Avernus at a B instead of an A. And with most reviews and opinions, a lot of it's subjective. My experience will be different than your experience, of course. But one thing I can say is not objective, and I would say if you're going to take away anything from this video, the one key thing, don't run Baldur's Gate. It's still awful.
There's a new kid on the block. Oh, fucking Christ. Oh.